Well, ho, 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 and happy gifting season to all of you. It's a bittersweet time of year, because on the one hand, we're heading into the holidays, but on the other, this is the last Regcast of the year. So obviously, I'm celebrating today, and hopefully in the next hour, you will be as well. So, today we're talking about virtualization. But as you noticed, we said virtualization not for beginners. This is the real stuff we've got today. So for that, we needed three wise men in the studio. Unfortunately, three wise men don't turn up until the 6th of January. So instead, we have, from Microsoft, our partridge in a pear tree, Mr. Neil Sanderson. Neil, hello.
Hi.
Now, Neil, I got you a little present as well. If you could just wear that just for your introduction, because I know obviously you are a serious businessman. That's terrific. Thank you very much.
Like it.
And to go with Neil today, we have our own Yule log, Mr. Party Hands himself, John, watch out for that mistletoe, Collins. Hello, John.
Bar humbug to you too.
Bar humbug to you too. And John doesn't, of course. I'm sorry, John.
That's really great.
We didn't have very many hats left in the shop.
I've been a bad girl.
What can you say? It's so true.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much. And yes, great. Now, before we take our hats off, we just have to get through the basic housekeeping of this. If you'll see above our heads, you have the normal buttons you have. The most important one is the one where you ask us questions. Please do ask us questions. Questions might be, how do I handle the load when backing up, these sort of things, or where do you get a hat like that, John? These are both valid questions. Please do ask them. You've got the bios of the presenters today. You can download this presentation if you want to look at it at your leisure later, and also give us your feedback. We do more of what you like at the Reg, unlike those other webcasts that we don't mention. So, today's topic is virtualization for hard-nosed people, beyond the low-hanging fruits. And just before we get going, John, very quickly, we did have a lot of jokes last time about Elvis Presley, our other presenter. Some of you might remember this. Our other presenter was an Elvis fan. And your colleague reminded me that actually you produced a definitive biography of the Canadian prog rockers Rush, didn't you?
Absolutely right.
So I looked up some of Rush's song titles so that we could just work that in. And today, I'd be trying to work in titles like The Necromancer, Bytor and the Snow Dog, and The Temples of Syrinx. It's like Spinal Tap without the comedy.
Can't see the wood for the trees, guys.
You see, for anyone who doesn't know anything about Rush, which is most of us, this has no meaning. John, first of all, before we get going, I need you to explain, why is it virtualization for hard-nosed people? Why did we promise on the website that beginners need not apply? And you can take your hat off now.
Oh, thank God. Right, good. Well, that's a big relief to all of us, and we can get down to business.
Yes.
I think getting down to business is the theme. The fact of the matter is, as we look through where people are at with virtualization, there's a lot of activity going on, as many Reg readers know. However, there's not that much activity going on in what we would term the production environment, the mainstream, anything beyond the pilot. So while a lot of organizations are saying that they are doing virtualization, generally it tends to be around quite discrete workloads, still around test development, around non-core applications, etc. So that's really the low-hanging fruit of virtualization. We want to know where you can go next.
So this is the problems that you're likely to encounter when you get into doing the really serious stuff.
And we've had a heck of a lot of feedback from the Reg audience about that, so we're happy to share that with...
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. By clicking here. There we go. So the thing about virtualization, which is very interesting to us, particularly in the credit crunch, is the fact that a lot of people are showing a lot of interest to it. And as we know, IT as an industry likes to create stuff and say everyone should be doing this, everyone wants it, etc., etc. That's kind of I've been doing this for 20 years, and certainly that's been my experience right the way through. It took me a while to work out that that's what was going on, but finally I got it. But what's interesting about virtualization is it's sort of working a bit the other way round, or at least it's happening from both sides. So yes, the industry is saying virtualization, best thing since sliced bread. absolutely everyone should be doing it. Meanwhile, from the corporate perspective, companies large and small are saying, actually, this is quite good. We're saving a lot of money here. We can do a lot of stuff that we couldn't do before with this. We're able to, particularly back to the downturn thing, we're able to consolidate onto a smaller number of servers, etc., etc., etc. And as we can see from the chart, a lot of organisations, as I say, so even the smallest organisations are seeing an impact on how they plan what they're doing. And we know that we have a similar picture in terms of how they think about their management strategy, how they think about what they're doing operationally. This is showing how they architect their IT environment, certainly from a server perspective. And so whatever virtualization stage is at in terms of what people are actually doing with it, there's certainly a lot of people right now that are thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And the trouble is, maybe, well, I know the trouble is that we're trying to do it without that much experience. So it is a brand new thing. And, okay, mainframe guys, we've talked to you before. Okay, thanks for that. Yes, you were still right. And we'll say that as long as we're talking about virtualization, probably. But what's different here is that virtualization isn't just in a single box. It's extending across the entire IT environment. So all of the servers that you have will probably at some point in the future have some kind of virtualization capability. The storage you have will probably have some kind of virtualization capability. Desktops right now have the ability to run something virtualized. So the question is really how to join all of that up together. And really those are the kinds of challenges that people are starting to see now.
So we've turned the corner, Niels. We're turning a corner and we're not turning back.
Yeah, I think virtualization has certainly established itself as a part of the picture. I think what we're going to see is it's going to become a much bigger part of overall IT infrastructure. But I think we're going to stop looking at virtualization as such, and we're going to start looking at what it's delivering, where it's relevant, where it really provides the value. So how does it fit into the bigger picture?
Okay.
So the question is, where is it going to fit into the big picture, and absolutely how? And the two areas still, let's be realistic about this. While there's all sorts of things that you might be able to do with virtualization, right now, when we ask the questions, the two areas that people are kind of concentrating on are still money saving, at the same time as giving them additional flexibility. And this flexibility point is particularly relevant when we think about the demand for virtualization, because it's difficult to quantify in cost terms. However, it does give people an awful advantage when it actually comes to using it from an operational perspective, being able to simplify how maintenance is done, being able to migrate applications, etc., etc. So these two criteria seem to be driving the next stage, if you like, of virtualization.
This is kind of like the stuff we've been talking about all this year, isn't it, though? I mean, it's like...
Yeah, I think I've been in IT even longer than John, probably. So a big chunk of it as an IT manager. And I would say there are very few cases, if we're really honest, there are very few cases where a technology has been able to show real, tangible business benefits, and you've really been able to point to them and say, by doing this, we will save this money. And I think virtualization has been in that position for the last 12 to 18 months, where it's been used. So you can say, by consolidating these servers, I'm going to save this much power, this much space. I'm not going to have to extend my data center. I'm going to avoid a certain amount of CO2 emissions, so X 100 tons of CO2 emissions. I don't have to dispose of that hardware kit. So I think it has been a very attractive technology in terms of quick projects.
I like it's sort of a step one thing. It's easy to get on to step one.
Yeah. So I think the early stages have been easier.
Yeah.
I think what I tend to say is continue to focus on the cost, and think about cost, think about ROI, but also think about flexibility, because as we hope we're coming out of the downturn, we hope we're going to be looking into, as organisations, certainly commercial organisations, look towards coming out of recession. Then it's important that they not only can deliver cost savings, but they can also make their operations work faster, deliver applications, deliver services.
Okay, it's this sort of stuff we're going to get onto today.
Yeah, so I think we're moving possibly from a stage where cost was the only thing, because of the environment, the economic environment particularly, but wise organisations have been thinking about flexibility and using virtualisation to do that. I think we'll see more of that.
Okay. Now, we've got a couple of slides of what the reg...
We have. Before
Yeah.
I get on to that, though, I would say, hold your horses, Tim. Don't jump ahead. I would say that... hold your horses. Is that anything to do with Christmas?
Get on with it.
No, it's not. Sorry. Okay, I would
Ranger,
say
please.
that we've got to recognise upfront that virtualisation is a two-edged sword. So when we talk about things like availability, when we talk about things like flexibility, etc., virtualisation can help with those things. Equally, it can hinder, because while there are a whole bunch of capabilities available in virtualization that enable it to increase the availability, for example, failover capabilities that are actually built into the technology, if you're not thinking about those things up front and you're not planning them in, then you end up with a virtualized environment that actually is no more stable and maybe less stable. It's the eggs in a basket principle than you started with.
Okay, so, very relevant. So I'm saying, you know, although it's been easy to get onto step one, if you just get onto step one as quickly as you can, you're going to run into problems.
And also, I think what we're seeing is it's a case now of looking at some of the more critical workloads that haven't been virtualised to date. How do you do that? Now, naturally, once you start to do that, you've got to think even more carefully about disaster recovery, availability, management, because you're working with some of the high-profile applications and services in the organisation.
Okay.
So, with that caveat in mind, Reg audience seem very positive, very positive. Some choice comments from here. I've had my fill of metal systems. Virtualization should be first on everyone's list this Christmas, which is slightly scary. I'm not sure my daughter would fully appreciate getting a virtualization
So she watched one of these
solution.
webcasts before. I'm not sure she would, actually, from her comments. Yeah. But I mean, it's somewhat unlike, I don't want to criticise the Reg audience, but it's somewhat unlike them to be so positive.
Which is when we look at the other side, maybe. And I think that... see what we did there, good segue. I think that the reality is that people that have done it, that have got benefits from it, are really going, yeah, this has been fantastic. Mm-hmm. People that haven't done it, that don't necessarily qualify as the kind of production scale beyond the low-hanging fruit group, which we'll get to when we talk about databases and that kind of thing, have said, look, we're maxing out our servers already. What benefit would we possibly have by introducing yet another layer of software in there? So there's that group as well. And the people that have tried it and are starting to hit some of the challenges, you put the whole lot together, and yeah, absolutely, there's a bunch of things that we do need to think about when it comes to virtualization on the downside.
Right. Is there any one of these that you'd pick out?
Let's
a lot of them.
Let's go anti-clockwise a little bit and pick on storage for a moment.
Yeah.
I think people have been virtualizing servers and going, whoopee, this is great. Oh, hang on, we're starting to get a whole bunch of storage contention. Just the relationship between the server and the storage, that bottleneck, is causing people problems. The cost benefits, I think, I wouldn't say it's been overstated, but I would say that if you're not building in all of the costs from the start, then you may find out that some of the costs come back and bite you, because management doesn't go away, management costs don't go away. Issues around, just back to your point, Tim, around trying to do it without necessarily thinking ahead. Are the machines that you've got actually powerful enough to run virtualization? Have you got enough RAM? Do you need to increase the amount of RAM, et cetera, et cetera? There's a bunch of technical reasons there. But then it kind of goes into a workload conversation. So what kinds of workloads do you have? What kinds of things are you trying to run? Is virtualization actually going to benefit those workloads? Is it going to make you easier to deliver the services that you need to deliver to your users at a reduced cost, which ultimately has to be the goal?
Yep.
Yeah.
And
so these are familiar complaints to you?
They're all familiar issues, particularly the big concern I have from my IT manager background is the comment about server sprawl. Now have VM instance sprawl at 100 times the rate. The old comment that actually with virtualization, if you want 100 servers, all you have to do is bang your head on the keyboard 100 times. In fact, of course, you don't need to because you could script it, but that's a minor point. You then have to control, manage, secure all of those servers. So, and that's, I think, typical of the stage that we're moving out of the early adoption stage with lots of enthusiasm, and actually now we're starting to see more tactically, more carefully where virtualization really fits in and how we avoid those problems.
All right, so yeah, if anyone is watching this, if there's stuff on that slide that you think that we haven't got to, or there's something that's absolutely driving you crazy on that slide, make sure you let us know, because John will help you.
Absolutely, and remarks like database virtualization just adds complexity. To me, they're an indication of where we are at in terms of experience. Virtualization just applied as a vanilla layer on top of everything we've got isn't necessarily the best way forward. Virtualization understood, together with databases, understood, put the two together and work out how best they can work together. That's something that we're evolving over time. The best practice in these areas is still pretty sparse, to be fair. But all the same, I wouldn't be too downhearted. When we do the survey kind of stuff, we're not seeing any major, 80% of people say that don't touch it with a barge pole because of X.
Yeah.
We're not seeing that X. We are seeing the sprawl point. It does come to the fore. So this was a poll that we did with the register audience. So self-selecting people that are interested in virtualization. More likely to be positive, quite possibly, but equally they are saying that sprawl's an issue, so that's clearly something that's got to be seen as important. Management harder, costs higher, etc., etc. But the top one was the systems ownership thing. So just the politics of virtualization, just getting people to want it, getting people to understand that it's safe, that they can trust moving their workloads onto their applications onto the same server as someone else's applications, that the contention issues are going to be resolved, etc.
And also the nirvana that's often put to, that I hear from vendors is the idea that it gives power to all sorts of people around the organisation to start doing things for themselves.
And that can be very challenging in other ways. So I spoke to a customer in the finance sector quite recently, and they implemented self-service provisioning for users for certain types of server environments. Users loved it. They would come in on a Monday morning. They would put in their provisioning requests for 10 or 20 environments, go away, have a cup of coffee, come back, and it was all set up for them. All set up with all the appropriate permissions and with all the templates done and everything. The problem was they couldn't work out why everything else in IT didn't turn around in the same speed. So you have this culture where it's not just about the physical server being turned around in 30 seconds or a few minutes or half an hour. It's everything else that goes around it in terms of delivering an overall service.
And that sort of stuff does go way back into the layer next to technology. I'm not sure exactly where it is with relation to IT. It's things like procurement. Large and small companies, it can take 3 or 4 weeks to get sign-off for something that needs to be bought. It could be a toner cartridge. It could be anything. So the idea that we want to be flexible, we want to be agile, etc., etc., but you put a request for a purchase order in, it takes 4, 5, 6 weeks to actually turn around. It's quite hard to reconcile the two.
And then, as you say, there's the culture aspect. So in Microsoft, we've had a similar kind of culture change where physical servers used to be bought by individual departments, and you had a budget, and so you went and bought the server that you could get for that budget. And Microsoft IT was just left to manage all of this stuff. And in the course of really the last couple of years, that's turned completely around. So if you want to have some computing capacity, you come and talk to me in Microsoft IT about what you're trying to do. And then you will get the resources that you need to deliver what it is you're doing. Not a physical server, that doesn't happen anymore unless it's really exceptional. And that's been being very honest, and Microsoft IT have been very honest, they've talked about this. That's a very, very painful culture change. It doesn't happen quickly. Because I'm used to going with my cost centre and going and placing an order for the best server I can get for that money. And the fact that I didn't need that capacity was a different matter. So it's taking a service rather than having a server and feeling that ownership that I used to.
So before we get on to more technical things, unless you've got these things sorted out right at the beginning, then you're going to have a difficult time whatever you decide to do.
Isn't that the age-old issue of IT? Looking for short-term solutions. I can think of some research that we did last year, 18 months ago, which was around resilience, application resilience. The whole principle of failover, people weren't building it into their procurements. So, and I can almost see the way these things work, where you say, yep, we want to put a new application in place, we want to stick it on that database, we want that software, we're going to code up that bit, we're going to deliver that user interface. That's the hardware we need to run it on. To make it resilient, we better add another one, we better make it run like this, that and the other. Stick it all together, and then you go to say to the guy who's got the budget, so can we have it then? And he says, can't afford that, what can you cut out? And so, where you start to trim, it's not going to be on the functionality, it is on the resilience, and that comes back and bites you 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And so it's no different here.
That's also moving from tactical use of virtualization or use in discrete projects to applying it more broadly across the whole of the IT infrastructure. And that's when you start to run into these bigger issues.
Right, can we get into how we sort out some of these? Because we've got a bunch of questions that I know are going to turn up in the slides.
Absolutely. Okay. So just had a quick peep at the questions myself, and we're going to be going through answering some of those questions in the rest of the presentation. There's 3 things that we really need to cover off. The first is around planning and design, which is kind of what we keep talking about. Data protection and just understanding availability, security, risk management around virtualization is clearly very important again. And then finally the management aspects, and we've got a few questions on that we'll cover off as we go along. So first off then, let's think about the planning side of things, and I'm going to hand straight over to Neil because he's put this great little flowchart thingy together.
I was going to say, normally you don't have quite so many boxes in your slides. Must be one of them. So, okay, that makes sense of this for us, Neil.
Yeah, so I can't actually claim the credit for this because this has come from our Microsoft TechNet team. So there is quite a lot of best practice and prescriptive guidance around beginning to come together to pick up on John's point before, and from a Microsoft point of view, that's on our TechNet site for those who want to see what's available. So this is the kind of top level of a whole set of planning guidance. But what it's really saying for me is there are essentially 3 main stages. One is around analysing. So what are you trying? Where is your virtualization going to be applied? Which workloads is it? As we start to move into more of the tier 1 workloads, especially, and analysing in terms
tier 1 workload, you mean?
The most significant workloads in the organisation.
Yeah.
So typically the ones that take money, deal directly with customers.
Yeah.
And in terms of analysing the backup, the fault tolerance, how you're going to support that workload appropriately. And then the second layer of this, steps 4, 5 and 6, for me are really around planning. So that's the usual disciplines of let's understand the workload requirements, design and plan the host hardware, and assign where those workloads are going to go. One of the things with virtualization is you don't want to spend too long trying to optimize it at the beginning, because with the ability to migrate workloads, virtual machines live between physical hosts, that's something you can continue to optimize. You don't have to get it perfect at the beginning, but it doesn't mean just shove it anywhere and
doesn't mean just set the thing up and then just sort of like, it doesn't mean you have like 2 big dials or something.
Yeah,
like
just watch it.
Yeah.
Watch it go. So you do still need to plan and think through those things carefully. And then finally, it is around design. It's around designing the backup, the fault tolerance, the storage, the network infrastructure, because virtualization infrastructure does, as John was saying, place particular different requirements in some of those areas, so you need to be aware of what that's doing. Lots more detail behind that if people want it, but for me it's also...
Can they get more detail behind that if they want it from you?
Yeah, so the TechNet site, technet.microsoft.com, is where there's a whole set of these guides around planning for all sorts of different types of virtualization. And the approaches are not specific, obviously, to Microsoft technologies. It's about how you implement different types of projects. So there's that, and there's the technical guidance. The thing I was going to say is I think the 2 key things for me is, if you like, the step before, and the steps afterwards. So the steps afterwards we've just been talking about in terms of really how do you make virtualization part of the IT infrastructure, dealing with some of these culture changes. Virtualization starts to push things in IT in a direction that we've been talking about for some time. So it starts to foster things like chargeback. It's focusing on the service rather than the physical servers. So it's a different relationship that IT has with business once you start to use virtualization. You're breaking down the departmental ownership of systems, and IT is delivering a service out. But the piece before is the even more significant piece, which we have touched on to a certain extent, which is why. What is it you're actually trying to achieve from your server virtualization? Because if you're not really clear about whether you are focusing just on cost or whether you're also looking for the flexibility and taking some of that dynamic IT type of benefit, then you're not going to have a clear idea of where virtualization is really going to help you.
And you can't adjust that when you're in the middle of all of this.
What I would say is think about specific applications or workloads, and think about those as you're applying virtualization. But bear in mind that what you want to get to is being able to optimize across those. So you want to have pools of resources that you can optimize and run more efficiently to deliver service. So think about applications and workloads, but bear in mind where you want to get to, which is pools of resources that you can manage effectively.
That's a nice flowchart, John, but is it realistic?
I think not having a flowchart is unrealistic.
Right.
Let me put it that way. And some of the things that are in here are very much around ensuring that you've thought of everything you need to do. So, you know, whichever it reminds me of Dilbert, some of these flowcharts, and this one doesn't, Neil. I say that very quickly.
You backed up for that one.
This one is nothing like Dilbert, but ultimately there's just a checklist of things. If you haven't thought of all of these things, then you may have missed something else. And planning, getting that flexibility planned in, rather than waiting 6 months down the line, you've already put virtualization in and you're going, well, it's not very flexible, is it? Well, whose fault is that? You know, it's not even necessarily going to be a case of spending more money early on. It could be just spending the right money on the right things early on to make sure that you've got what you need built into the infrastructure from the outset.
I suppose the question is, if you're doing it and you've got a savings, you know, and you're trying to save because you've got a lot of underutilized servers all the time, you then also have to accept if you're going to get the flexibility, then that's going to cost. There's a cost on that. It reduces your overall savings.
And isn't that a great opportunity? I mean, we talk about IT people having a hard time trying to sort of do the business thing and, you know, cost justify stuff and make things business relevant, etc., etc. But if the business comes to you and says, how can we save a whole bunch of money? You can say, well, we can save a whole bunch of money. We can either save this much and leave ourselves with no leeway whatsoever, or we can just save this much and actually give ourselves that flexibility we're going to need for the future. Your choice. And so it becomes quite a business conversation, but it's still a cost-saving conversation. So rather than going and bleating and trying to get more money, you can say, we'll just save a bit less. So there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, but the other thing, which I think this also lends itself to, is what a number of customers have told me, which is start small, but actually think big from the start. So think about the bigger scope, but start with a scope that you can manage and evolve on.
I don't see, you know, one of the questions here is saying, you know, someone saying, what guidance can you offer the working man in enterprise architecture moving from a tactical to ubiquitous virtualization? And the basic thing is go through this flowchart right at the beginning. Yeah.
I'm just looking at the Rush references there. We thank you guys. That's fantastic.
You see, you know,
they call me the working man because that's what I am.
Yes,
there you go. Fantastic.
I listened to the first 10 seconds of it, and it's like,
I mean, I quite like that one.
Considering it was an era of the Sex Pistols and New Order and Iggy Pop and the Stooges, peak period David Bowie, Rush was an interesting choice. Back to virtualization.
Moving swiftly on. So maybe the next aspect, and I'll do the segue if you like, Neil, but what we're seeing around desktop virtualization is a little bit of reticence, I think, and certainly the Reg audience can't push back on desktop virtualization in terms of a thing. And why should we just virtualize our desktops in the same way that thin clients was just a thing?
We've been down this route before, haven't
we? Exactly. But what we are tending to see is that it shouldn't be seen in isolation. And actually, if you've got an environment which has already started to treat virtualization of the servers as more of the norm, desktop virtualization actually starts to become something that you can build on top of the server platform. So God knows what questions are coming up next.
I just wonder whether actually it would be interesting, I don't know if we can, in terms of the reg audience that we've got. My feeling from a lot of customers I talk to is that actually IT is coming under some pressure from the business to look at desktop virtualization. And that's driven by the perceived cost of delivering the desktop at the moment.
Yes.
And so a lot of customers I talk to, business is saying, I thought we could save a ton of money around the desktop. Are you guys looking at it? It'd be interesting to know if that's actually the experience that the audience are seeing.
Well, that's a good question, yeah. So, if anyone has been put under pressure to virtualize the desktop just because the costs, it's not quite as cheap as actually Microsoft was telling you 5 years ago, then please do let us know. And because the desktop virtualization has been the kind of like the next thing after the server virtualization.
Well, there's this theory that says, well, if you virtualize your servers, you might as well virtualize your desktop because it's all using the same word, which actually that's not a good extrapolation. A better extrapolation is you're building a platform. What can you build on top of it? And that's more of the right way around. And where we are seeing some success, and this has come from the register audience, while it's not a panacea for everybody, is that if you can isolate different groups of people and treat them in some way, so one group of people may be more appropriate, for example, with very locked down desktop policies. Another group of people you may want to open up and give them a maximum flexibility, etc., etc. I'm not saying desktop virtualization gives you that. I'm saying that if you are thinking about building in virtualization, bringing virtualization in the mix, it gives you tools to enable you to start to make those kinds of decisions.
And I think that's a very good point, because I think some of the scepticism about desktop virtualization is in a lot of ways, I can see the reason behind it, because it's scepticism that there is an easy answer and that there's one single solution, that there's one single way of changing the desktop. And the reality is that, as you've just said, John, there are a variety of different types of users, different types of desktops, and you can use virtualization to deliver a cheaper, more effective desktop service to different types of user. But there's no one single answer that would just magically change everything, because people have different needs.
I see, and I understand that. And just looking at this slide, Neil, there's one thing comes into my head. What do you actually mean with this slide? What are we saying?
So yeah, this is quite a busy slide.
It is.
So what we're really saying is virtualization on the desktop is fundamentally doing a similar kind of job, if you like, to virtualization on the server or elsewhere in IT. So what we're trying to use it to do is to separate out the different layers of the desktop and take away the dependency between them. And if you think of the set of layers on the left-hand side, what you effectively have is hardware, an operating system, set of applications, and then the user settings and the user data and profile and how it looks and my wallpaper, my backdrop. And what you can do is virtualize at different levels of that. So you can virtualize the user state and have that roam to wherever the user is. And that's actually a very established technology that's been around for a long time. You can virtualize the application so it runs in its own bubble, doesn't conflict with anything else, doesn't care. You can stream it on demand if you like. That technology has been around for several years. So certainly from a Microsoft point of view, the AppV technology has been around, and customers have found that to be something they really can use effectively. So they're pretty, I would say, pretty established ways of reducing cost and deploying applications more quickly. Around the operating system and separating that from the hardware, you've got basically two options. You can actually virtualize the whole of the operating system and have a separate instance, which means you can run the application in there, or you can actually configure that differently, which in public sector has been quite a significant area of interest. So if you want to go to this internal highly confidential, highly secure website, you actually do that in a different environment, which is configured completely differently from your normal environment. So you're not going to cut and paste from my internal secure, high security website to your Facebook page. I need to offer you both those, but in completely different environments. And then actually presenting, if you like, this something that has, I think, become very, very much of interest, the whole idea of running the desktop in the data center, virtual desktop infrastructure. And that, again, is another option that provides for the ability to deliver a desktop. But it's one option.
It really puts pressure on the state of your management tools, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It means that you need to be able to have, if not just deliver the application, but actually be able to service it and control it, remove it when across all of these different layers.
So, John, is the state of the management tools available now up to that?
It's not just the tools. I think that where you're absolutely right is that it depends on the state of your management. And
not just the tools, the people.
This level of flexibility, the way I see IT in the past is possibly slightly bureaucratic, slow moving, etc., etc. 4 weeks to provision a server.
You were one of the bureaucrats at that time.
I was a control freak.
Was Neil, yes.
Yeah. But the fact that everything takes so long means that we've actually got the time that we need to think about things and put them in place in the right way, etc., etc. And management methodologies, things like ITIL and so on, have evolved around that, around this kind of approach to, there you go, kind of very slow, slow-moving IT. Yep. You add this level of dynamism, I don't know whether necessarily the management processes are going to be appropriate. I think this is one of the things that we're learning on the job right now, that level of flexibility. How good are we as managers to actually deliver flexibility?
And I think part of that is how much knowledge and intelligence you can build into the management tools. So if your management tools mean that to do anything you've got to go deep dive into the lowest level and fiddle around with the registry and Windows in order to get anything to happen, because the tools don't have the ability for you to work at a higher level, then you're never going to be able to deliver that effectively. It's going to go out of control. But if the management tools deeply understand the platforms and the applications they're managing, know what's healthy and what's not, know what to do when things go wrong, what your policy is, understand how you want your environment to look, and therefore know when it's right or wrong, then they make it possible for you to operate at a much higher level.
It sounds like this might be one of those things that it's good to park for a little while until you got the servers sorted out.
I think it depends on where your focus is. So in practice you might find that the best ROI in the short term is around, you need to deliver an application out to the desktop. You don't know enough about those desktops, or you just want it out very, very quickly, so you can use application virtualization to deploy the application. And that could mean that your sales force can be more productive out in the field and can be getting you more business, which could keep you in business. So it just depends.
Two thoughts there. One is that the management point is valid across virtualization, not just desktop. And the second is, don't forget that VDI virtual desktop can be used to lock things down as much as it can be used to open them up. So it's that then comes down to your decision-making process.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Sure.
And that slightly moves on to what we're going to say about virtualization on the desktop and how you would approach it. And this is very much the framework we use at Microsoft, but I think it does apply quite broadly.
There's something about those 5 pictures tells me it's a Microsoft. The one on the left is what Microsoft thinks people in the centres look like. Yeah.
So I think it's always difficult to find kind of sensible, acceptable photos.
I understand.
But I think. And what we are trying to do here is to try to pick some examples. Now, obviously, in the real world, your users will vary from the particular groups we've touched on here. But the fundamental principles still apply. That you tend to have groups of users who are either needing extreme mobility and are always on their mobile phones and they're away from the office. You may have contractors that you just don't know or don't want to know anything about what their their desktop device is. You don't want to know what else is on there, but you need to be able to deliver something to them. You may have some of your staff in the office who are highly dependent on resources that they use and applications, may need to work from different offices occasionally. Increasingly, there's a drive for providing full ability to work from home, so having access to all your data, all your applications effectively from home. And yeah, in lots of environments, you may have a requirement that when people have finished with the session that they're running, or at the end of the day, you have to wipe that desktop environment. You have to be able to be sure and to be able to show that there is no persistence from one user to the next on the same device. Mm-hmm. So really what we're saying is, and again, there's a huge amount of detail for people who want to follow behind that, the basics flowchart there. But what we're saying is understand the types of people types of users that you have, and match those groups with these types of requirements, and understand how you deliver the right combination. Virtualization is part of that. It's not just about virtualization. There's a whole series of other facilities they would need.
But it's part of what is quite a significant project to get this sorted out, because you can't do it half-heartedly.
You can do a kind of start small, think big. So you could focus on, say, your mobile staff and make sure that they are able to access all your key applications remotely, and how virtualization would fit in with that. Sometimes also home access is a major issue, particularly if there's
it's because we've got a couple of questions saying, where might you start on that, and those are a couple of things that you would
so home is particularly relevant, not just for the convenience, work-life balance thing, but also business continuity. So we have yet to see the major swine flu epidemic that was forecast. But if we end up with a lot of people needing to work partly from home, partly in the office, or if there's a major climate problem and flooding or whatever, that's when these things become not just kind of nice, but actually essential to keep the organisation running.
Yeah. Okay, we need to keep moving on, John, because I want to give enough time to these back-end slides.
So that's planning. I think that just for the audience's benefit, we didn't necessarily want to spend all of the session on desktop virtualization, but we do know it's a controversial area, so it was worth spending a bit of time on it. The second point I said I'd mention was data protection aspects, and one thing that has come through very, very strongly is how storage and servers, where they meet, virtualization is causing as much a bottleneck as anything.
Yeah.
You put 5 machines onto a single server, and then basically you try and back them all up at the same time, and they're all running at 20% more capacity than they were previously. So have you got that extra capacity on your server? And B, they're all trying to access the network port at the same time, or the HBA, the storage port at the same time. So that's something that obviously has to be planned in. And this is why I say, data protection, virtualization can both help and hinder data protection, because it gives you a whole set of new options. So you have to be au fait with the different options, whether or not you're backing up the physical server, you're backing up the virtual machines by putting an agent within the virtual machine, whether or not you're going to back up from the storage directly. All of these choices are available, and ultimately it takes a savvy network architect, systems architect to decide how best to do it.
Because I did notice a couple of questions about the I/O bottlenecks, and also someone who did point out a very basic thing, that for both security and data protection, you need to be careful about where you actually locate your servers once you start bringing them all together, virtualizing them all together.
Absolutely, and that's no different to how you would design a server room, only now you're designing a server. I think that you've got to think about points of weakness in your architecture and how much information you're trying to get through. Simple things that can go a long way, like not scheduling all backups at the same time on the same server, so you can vary when backups take place, and just smart thinking.
It's a case of rethinking design. These sort of things in detail, whereas previously you might have thought, let's do it all at the same time, because that was just the simplest way to set it up.
But at the same time, and as I said, we can talk about availability. Virtualization does give you the possibility of having more than one virtual machine running the same workload that you can situate in very different places and fail over one to the other. Keep the old hot standby can be a virtual machine. Why not? Even if you've got the live machine being a physical machine, and so all these different options. But you do have to think about them and plan them in.
Okay. Yeah. Let's move it on because there's a couple of important ones coming up.
But to management, and oh, by the way, just one thing I did want to say about the questions that came in. The question around what kinds of workloads. There are some quite straightforward, yet not so low-hanging fruit kind of workloads around. The lowest are obviously the kind of file and print, but you can move up into your web servers, your application servers, and then you do start to hit the database layer, really. And back to the comment someone had around if I move all my databases, or the databases that are appropriate to move, into the virtual pool, that then leaves me a whole bunch of headroom that I can use for other stuff. So it's not necessarily even trying to make the databases run better than ever. They can carry on running just as they are. It's what additional headroom it gives you on the servers to do other stuff with.
Okay.
So, but all of that, and I think possibly we've banged on about this one enough, says if you're not able to manage a dynamic environment, sooner or later you're going to have problems, because a lot of the flexibility does come down to how clever and good you are at provisioning and allocating whatever server resources you have, whatever storage resources you have, etc., to the right applications at the right time. And in the old days, if you've got a server, it's running a database, you've got direct attached storage, that's where the database exists physically, it's running the application, you're then broadcasting it out to screens. Very simple, very easy to say, well, we need it big enough. Now, immediately, we're taking away all of those constraints, but we're saying, this week you may have got it right, next week you may have got it wrong. So that's the very first thing already, even before we start to think about, highly dynamic IT and the kind of the nirvana of virtualization. Our ability to do capacity planning, our ability to manage that provisioning process becomes crucial. And that feeds directly round into our help desk and support processes. In terms, someone calls up and says, can I have, I need a bit more space, I need a bit more storage, something's not working right, something's running slow, etc., etc. We need to be able to be responsive, to Neil's point earlier. And then finally, of course, diagnosis, fault resolution, etc., etc. They're all linked together. And hopefully into a virtuous circle, but the point is be careful that it's not a vicious circle. Is that enough?
Yeah,
is that enough on those points?
That's perfect on those points, because we've got some of this sort of in practice, really, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, I was picking up on some of the ideas on that previous slide that John was just talking about, because I think the real challenge with virtualization, that virtualization really points to, is the need to manage at multiple different layers, but also to be able to correlate between them. So from a fault diagnosis point of view, you need to know, how the application inside the virtual machine is performing. You'd know that if it was running if it wasn't running virtualized. You have to be able to know exactly the same details about the performance of the application if it's virtualized. How is the OS performing inside the virtual machine? How's the hypervisor performing? How is the hardware performing? But you need to be able to correlate between them and take action. So if you have an alert from the hardware side that some component is overheating or it may be about to fail, then you need to be able to, your management tools need to be able to help you to understand what the implications are at the other levels of the stack and what you're going to do about it. So you might have a warning of a hardware failure, and the action might be you want to move the virtual machines off that physical host onto another one. Which one do you move them to? You don't just pick it at random, otherwise you're going to spread the problem around your data center. So your management tools need to be able to guide you to where are you going to put those virtual machines to manage that load. How are you going to do it? You need the tools to help you, otherwise you're going to be trying to do all sorts of complex scripting at a low level. And so this is where management tools can start to be the intelligence and the way in which you can make sense of this picture. And equally, if you're at the top level, if there's an issue around the application performance in the virtual machine, what's the solution? Well, you might want to spin up new capacity on another physical host. So again, your management tools are going to help you to start to spread that load around.
Certainly key from the Reg feedback is that you cannot see the virtual world in isolation. You have to see it as a very clever way of representing the physical world, but experience shows as soon as you hit a bottleneck, it's a physical bottleneck.
Yes.
It won't be a virtual bottleneck. So you need to be able to link what's happening in the virtual world with what's happening in the physical world, so you can diagnose right to the point of bottleneck failure.
And you're going to have a mixture. So you at the application level, you're going to have you're going to have a variety of applications from different vendors, not just Microsoft.
So you've got the Penguin on there, yeah.
And you're going to have.
Didn't always have that.
So you very likely in something like 70% of all data centers have both Windows and Linux. And up to now, I think what we've seen is virtualization tending to be separating those two, so virtualizing Linux on Linux, Windows on Windows. Going forward, if you have both of those, you need to be able to virtualize those together, and you need to be able to manage them together and have one view across both.
Briefly, a Microsoft-specific thing that's come in this. Are you confident of Microsoft's ability to be able to handle these sort of problems?
Yes, so the tools that we deliver, the System Center tools, very much are looking to manage at all of these layers and to help you to not just manage, but to work proactively to manage across your infrastructure and to be able to optimize across different environments. So System Center can manage Linux and Unix as well, and it allows you to manage virtualized environments across both.
So we're going to see more of this next year, Tommy?
I think we'll continue to see investments in the ability of System Center to manage both physical and virtual, both desktop and server, and both Windows and other environments. Yeah.
So it's your plan that basically you treat these things exactly the same way.
I think it's recognising that customers have a variety of different technologies, and one of the things one of the promises of virtualization is that you can bring more varied applications and environments together and manage them effectively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Now we need to move on to this the next slide, because it's complex and we don't want to rush it too much. It's a lot of boxes on this
One of Neil's flowcharts.
It's complex, and again, thanks to the TechNet team, this is another piece of their guidance. And I actually wasn't going to go through this in huge amounts of detail.
The guys can look at it afterwards, yeah.
I think
the PDF.
So, and go to the TechNet site and you can get the full document. But I think the key points for me are, firstly, this first question is whether virtualization is actually the right solution. And I think one of the key things John and I were talking about before was one of the dangers with virtualization is making assumptions. And it may not be that virtualization is what you need.
The answer might actually be no.
It may be.
Who would it be no for example?
It could be certain cases in the database world, for instance, where there might be cases where virtualization isn't the right solution. You might instead do better to spin up multiple instances of the database engine, for instance, the SQL Server engine, rather than virtualizing the entire environment and having multiple virtual machines. So there certainly are both technical and business and cultural reasons why virtualization just might not be the right answer. And I think even the kind of general consensus on trending of virtualization is by 2012 we'll probably have half of all the servers being virtualized, and that's still going to leave 50%
that are not. Yes.
That are not, and some of those are will be for very good reasons. Mm-hmm. Obviously, looking at whether the workload is primarily around the server or the client, and I think we shouldn't forget that although technologies like Hyper-V and these virtualization technologies that take advantage of the new latest hardware are great and very, very good performance, you still have the option to use, if you like, some of the software virtualization where all the virtualization activity is done in software. For Microsoft, that's the virtual server product, but there are other products from other vendors as well, where you can reuse old hardware in order to provide virtualization on those. You don't have to invest in the latest and greatest. It depends what you're trying to do. From a desktop, a client point of view, it's fundamentally about, is that client going to have good persistent connections or not? Some variety of questions there. And then whether the application is one that can be run in the data center, is pretty well independent of the user, or whether it's one where it requires local access to resources, it's important for it to use the local compute power, or the user has it's highly personalized to an individual user. And based on those sorts of consideration, you start to get down to, are you going to look at something like VDI? If you're looking at virtualizing the entire desktop and running that in the data center, are you looking at just delivering an application to the client? So running it in the data center, but delivering it out to the client, or are you looking at some form of virtualization on the desktop, whether that's just of the application or that's the whole operating system?
So we're at the end of the time where sort of virtualization, which we assumed was a single process, everyone was more or less doing the same thing. That's old hat now.
That was server virtualization x86, and we've had a lot of pushback from Reg readers who've said, look, there's more than just one type of virtualization out there. And I think what's really changing is there's not only more than one type of virtualization out there, but they've all got to be considered at the same time if you want to get absolute value out of them. So it's not enough to think of storage virtualization in isolation from server virtualization, for example. It's how the virtualized storage, so a pool of storage that can go up and down with your needs, the pool of servers goes up and down, how are the two working together?
Okay, we need to move on because we're in the last 3 or 4 minutes. So I want to get to your
okay,
helpful
so
slide.
Ways to be successful, takeaways, focus on cost, and we've made this point, I think, reasonably strongly, that if you miss stuff out now, it'll come back and bite you later.
Yep.
So particularly operational costs, design costs, avoiding bottlenecks later. Security we haven't really talked about very much, but we should have done, because there's plenty around the security of the virtual layer itself, because you're adding an extra layer to the architecture. That's got to be secured. But equally, virtualization can go some way to give you more defense in depth. It can give you a separation of concerns in security language to help
You also
secure your
need to make sure, as with other areas, but particularly with security, that the disciplines and the processes you've already got in place apply just as much to your virtualized environment. And sadly, that isn't often enough the case. So a lot of virtual environments are not as well secured as their physical equivalents are. And that's quite a worrying trend, I think.
Well, it's a worrying trend from the legality of what you're actually doing, storing your data on it.
And just in terms of oversight, it comes back to the same thing. If you have duplication of processes and approaches, then that's when these sorts of things can happen. If you view virtualization as part of what you're doing, just another part of your IT infrastructure, and you approach it with the same disciplines, then you avoid that.
And linking that to the final bullet, and I'll let Neil sort of backtrack on one of the other ones. Virtualization does give you this ability to move stuff around, and I noticed one of the questions was, well, now I can move it anywhere in the world. I can move it on to a virtual machine running on Amazon, for example. Yes, absolutely right. Is it legal? Don't know. That's a business risk decision. If it's not legal, don't do it. Simple as that. Even if the technology allows you to.
And would you want to run that whole virtual machine on Amazon? Or actually, is it more effective just to take an individual service from an Amazon or a Windows Azure or any of the other providers, just take a discrete service? So would you want to run a virtualized Exchange environment on someone's public cloud? Well, why would you want to do that when you can just buy one mailbox or two mailboxes, just what you need? So I think we're going to see organizations building more flexible, more dynamic IT infrastructures in these kind of private
that's
cloud.
a decision that actively has to be made. It's not something that will just happen. And
I think that's where IT will move, but equally IT has got to understand what the balance is between that and the public cloud offerings and how to make the best use of both.
Okay, we've got 1 minute, John. You can have your last slide.
So
you can describe your last slide.
Moving swiftly on, to summarise then, the 3 areas that we've talked through. We've talked about design and planning. The key takeaway here is do it. Don't just assume that virtualization is going to solve all your problems, because it'll cause a whole bunch if you don't actually design it properly. Experience is at a premium at the moment, so so be prepared to have to read up, etc., etc. We've talked around data protection, security, etc. Double-edged sword. I think the takeaway there is to understand the information risks and make sure that virtualization isn't causing more risks to the information than it's solving. And then finally, management and operations. I don't think there is any kind of this is what you need to do kind of thing. But it does come down to organisational maturity and maturity of the processes you've got in place. So if you do have old-fashioned ways of delivering IT, there will become a point. So almost the takeaway is expect to have to change the way you're actually delivering services at some point in the future. So don't let that put you off virtualisation, because it can give you the cost and flexibility benefits now, but equally expect to have to evolve as a management organisation so that you can actually be more dynamic and deliver services more dynamically.
You need to be able to manage your IT very effectively, and some of that will continue to be physical, some of it will be virtual. But you've got to be able to manage it with control and flexibility and have the right tools to do it.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. We're out of time. I think we've managed to cover most of your questions there, all the ones that I could see. If there are any that we haven't covered, then we'll get Neil and John to sort them out later. There is one question, which is a request. Can we just do the hats one more time?
Absolutely.
Just before we go, pick up your hat, John. It's on the floor there. Just to say goodbye. Thank you very much for tuning in this year to our Regcasts. We've enjoyed doing them, and we hope they've been useful. So give us your feedback on this one. We take it all into account. So this will be available for to look at again if you want to see us in our hats. It'll look really ridiculous in January. Meanwhile, we'll be back next year. Keep in touch with what's going on in the Reg. You get your news from there, and that's going to carry on. You can also keep up with John, for example, who's maybe on his Twitter feed. He's Jono, J-O-N-N-O, Twitter. I looked at one of your recent tweets, John. It said, chicken for dinner tonight, yum. So that's definitely food
Not
for
bad
thought.
from a vegetarian.
Yeah. And, meanwhile, have a great gifting season, and we will see you again in 2010. Thank you very much to Neil. Thank you, John. And I've been Tim Phillips.
You.
Goodbye.